I've been playing a lot of Metroid Dread. I've been playing Samus's latest adventure. I've been going back to this game for the first time since it came out. I don't know why I've been putting it off so long because I actually started two files, a hard mode and a normal mode, immediately after the game came out. After I finished the game for the first time in October 2021, right? Like I was thrilled to play through Metroid Dread again, and I got a good ways into both files and then just kind of fell off because I had other things to play, I had other things to do. I was busy at the time. But like I came away like very with a very positive experience, right? Like I knew Dread was a great game. I was talking about it, like I was like really over the moon about it. I gave it really high praise, and I think the community agreed on this, right? It seems like Metroid Dread broke like the kind of Metroid like anti-fan pretendo like cycle where like a new game came out and people tried to pretend that like it was somehow disrespectful to the older games, right? You know, we got this with Other Realm, we got this with Federation Force, we got this with Samus Returns, like we got this with Metroid Prime 3 to an extent, and 2, right? Hunters, I'm sure, got this to a certain extent. Fusion got this. Like it was really standard for a long time to like complain about every new Metroid game by like pretending as if like Nintendo casualized it or Nintendo ruined the experience or that like Nintendo doesn't respect the fans and that like the IP just isn't relevant. Like there was this very big thing, right? This very big like there was this very big like conspiracy that Nintendo hated Metroid, right, for a very long time. And although it persists in certain circles, like I still see Sean Malmstrom trying to push the narrative, but like the reality is clear, is that like Metroid Dread is now the best-selling Metroid game ever, and that it is extremely popular. And I think kind of it's kind of the first example of the phenomenon that we've been noticing lately that people aren't necessarily talking about Nintendo games openly on forums anymore, on Twitter, on YouTube, like ever. And like the reason for that, and I think this is very observable if you've been like if you've seen how like Breath of the Wild was received or how like people treated games like Octopath Traveler or No More Heroes 3 or um let's see, what's another example? Uh, WarioWare, I think, is another good one. Like every Nintendo game that comes out that like has an audience that is played, that is talked, like that is fairly well received, like Fire Emblem, right? You know, every Nintendo game that comes out, Xenoblade, like every time you have a handful of people who didn't play the game coming on and trying to say the game was bad, I didn't like it, I pirated it and I completely regret it. I am unhappy. This is not what I wanted, right? Every single time this happens, right? You see people like coming out and crying about complete nonsense, right? And that happened with Dread, right? I remember people doing that with Dread. I remember people like, David Jaffe, I think, is the notorious example, but like, he's far from the only one, right? Like, it was a thing when that game first came out to try to say it wasn't a big deal, that Nintendo dropped the ball, that Mercury's theme, like, failed, and like, to a certain extent, like, I was maybe gaslit into thinking that, like, maybe this game wasn't as good as I thought it was, or maybe that like I would need some time to kind of evaluate it more or whatever. Coming back to it, like after all this time, 2 years, letting it settle, playing some other Metroid games, I've been playing I played through Fusion, I played through Prime, like giving like a 2 year span, right? And I come back to this game, and it is honestly better than it was the first time around. You start appreciating the artistry. You start appreciating like the combat mechanics, like the background art, the animations for both the monsters and Samus herself. You really appreciate the boss fights, which I think are safe to say are probably the series best. Like you really appreciate Ravenbeak as an antagonist, and I think he's kind of established himself as the all-time best. Like whenever this game is brought up, on 4chan or whatever, like people always emphasize that, like, wow, Ravenbeak is a great villain. I wish that he got more than one game, right? Like, I wish this guy came back, but like, he's kind of established himself at this point as being Samus's greatest adversary, right? Like in a lot of ways, he's kind of eclipsed Ridley in that regard, and it's such a crazy thing to think about that like a Nintendo protagonist could have like such a great like overarching antagonist like introduced completely out of nowhere like this, but like no, it seems to be true. Like fans are over the moon about Metroid Dread. Like the people complaining about Dread, the people who like are making up excuses like not to play it or that like the game isn't good or that like this isn't what I wanted or that it looks like a 3DS game. Like these people clearly weren't fans to begin with. And I feel like more and more like people are catching on to the fact that like they don't want to interact with people who never even played the game. Like if you have criticism of Dread, that's fine, right? You know, I have criticism of Dread, but like they're nuanced and they're balanced very heavily by the fact that I am a fan of the game and of the franchise as a whole, and I have a lot of things to say about it. You know, there are things you can say about Dread that could be seen as a knock against it or that like you know, Super might be better in some ways, Fusion might be better in some ways. Like there might be like things you could say about Dread that could have been done better. But like you're simply not getting that from mainstream discourse. Like you're not going on V and seeing people like make these kind of nuanced discussions on this. Like this stuff is happening on Discord. This stuff is happening in like YouTube comment sections. This stuff is happening like everywhere, right? Out of sight from the people who would try to convince you that the game wasn't very good, right? That's what it boils down to, is that like people are playing the game, they're enjoying it, they're talking about it, but they're not necessarily doing it in a way that would invite like backlash from the community, right? People aren't coming out and saying that like, oh, Metroid Dread, it's better than Hollow Knight, even though it is. Like, you don't have people doing that because we don't want to waste time arguing over petty nonsense instead of like talking about what's actually important, the game itself. And I think this is kind of the situation that Nintendo fans have found themselves in now, where like Sony and Microsoft fans will never ever PC gamers, you know, the PC master race, the steampunks, like these people will never admit that their platforms have no games, that they don't have a single game that can even compete with Metroid Dread or Xenoblade Chronicles 3, or Fire Emblem Three Houses or Engage, or Super Mario Bros., or The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, or Tears of the Kingdom, and so have to like settle with like some cheap derivative knockoffs that no one cares about. You know, stuff like Horizon Zero Dawn, stuff like Starfield, stuff like Team Fortress 2 and Overwatch, right? Like this is the lamest stuff imaginable, right? But this is all they have, so this is what they talk about, right? And they desperately, desperately try and gaslight you into thinking that Nintendo somehow has it worse. You know, even though I'm getting new games all the time from the company, not even new games, like updates to games like Splatoon 3 and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, right? Like, I'm at the point now where I don't even need to buy new games on Nintendo Switch to get like a ton of mileage out of it. Like, it's crazy to think about, but like it is true, right? Like and Metroid Dread, it's not that long. It's like what 6 to 8 hours for a first time playthrough, like longer if you want to percent it. But like it is a really fun, engaging, memorable 6 to 8 hours. Way better than anything in Hollow Knight or anything in like any other Metroidvania. Metroid-like game in recent years, right, and people are acknowledging that. People will talk about it, but it's like it's one of those things where like the competitors like are I suppose our gaming enemies, like our rivals, like they just will do everything they possibly can to downplay it until it becomes like you know, established as part of Nintendo's legacy. And I think that's kind of the trend we've been seeing lately, is that like Breath of the Wild, it was not acknowledged as a great game until it was time to like pretend that Tears of the Kingdom was disappointing. And I think that's kind of the situation we're in now, where like games like Travis Strikes Again or this or like Breath, like they won't be admitted, they won't be considered great until the new game comes out, and the establishment has to try and pretend the new game looks worse than the last. So that is what we're seeing now with Metroid Dread. I think it's safe to say the game is going to go on to be a classic. I consider it to be just as good as Super Fusion and Samus Returns, and I hope more people discover this game and this franchise as the years go on. Metroid Dread is a fantastic game.